What's up, everybody, and welcome to the second ever episode of the Chicago Football Show. I am Scott Bair, alongside the people that you know way back in the Bears on the Marquee days. That's Carmen, Vitali, and Mike Norman, and we are coming to you fresh after the Bears rookie minicamp has concluded. Now, Carmen, I'm curious. Does this feel like the start of the season? Is this pitchers and catchers? Or are we still way too far off? Because the draft is over, the player acquisition part is done, and I officially saw my first practice since January. It wasn't a good practice, but it was a practice. Is this the start of the football season, or do we got to keep waiting until July?
It's funny because when I worked for a team, this absolutely felt like the beginning of the next season because, the guys finally are coming back in. And even though it's rookie minicamp, there were a ton of vets that would come back into the building to start working out and getting their body right so that they can be ready to go for OTAs. So there is a little bit more buzz, I think, but I mean, we still have quite a few months to go before we're going to see any sort of football of consequence or any football that we can actually glean any information from. I think that's the big thing too, where rookie minicamp is great, but like you said, Scott, the practices, most of these guys won't be on the roster. It's not necessarily anything that you can take, like whoever's taking the first team reps versus the second team reps, but you really can't, there's no information to be found from any of that. It's really some individual guys that are on the bubble of maybe making the roster that these coaches are looking at. But outside of that, especially when you have your first round pick not practicing, there's not a whole lot you can take from it. So I don't mean to, it's fun, but it's not of consequence. How's that?
Carm, I would say this is like this isn't the first day of school, but this is like the day you find out your class, right? That was always a big day, especially fifth grade. Oh man, you're going to have a good year or a bad year, right? When you kind of find out that class, you got the good teacher everybody likes, or you got the teacher nobody likes, right? It could be a rough year after that. So I would say this is when you find out your class. We're still waiting for that first day of school when training camp starts, but you're starting to see that kind of come together with the Bears.
Yeah, and I really think, so even if we're not going to be able to take a bunch from the practices themselves, I think it gives us a good reason to talk about the rookies in addition to the fact that we have a very special guest. You know him well, I'm sure of it. Mike, let them know who the special guest is and what they can expect on this version of the Chicago Football Show.
Oh, yeah. So we are very excited to have Ian Rapoport join us, senior insider from the NFL Network. He's going to join us a little later in the podcast. But we're talking all rookie minicaps. Also, we're going to get to a little bit of the schedule breakdown. We know some of the schedule has been trickling out. We got a couple dates kind of penciled in on the schedule for the Bears. We know Black Friday is going to be busy with the Bears and the Eagles, and a Bears-Packers matchup is set in December. So we'll get to a little bit of the schedule talk, but the rookie minicamp is really the focus of today because, like we said, this is kind of the time where we're seeing all the rookies especially get together and kind of get those first days under Ben Johnson. Scott, you were there over the weekend. What kind of stood out amongst the rookie minicamp in person at Halas Hall?
Yeah, I'm definitely glad that Carmen kind of prefaced what rookie minicamp really is. It's a lot of tryout players, undrafted free agents, and they're working basic concepts with quarterbacks that won't be on the roster. So it's tough to say this guy looked great or he was dominant or anything like that. But over the course of the 3-day rookie minicamp, the Bears PR was kind of gracious enough to give us all three coordinators, Ben Johnson, and every draft pick. So we got a good sense of kind of what these guys are looking towards, what their goals are, and how they're going to fit in to this pretty talented roster. So, I mean, I would say because Colston Loveland is rehabbing from a shoulder injury, all eyes naturally go to offense and pretty much the offensive and defensive lines, with exception to a couple of periods, were kind of off on their own. But everybody likes watching a good 7-on-7. Am I right? So focus was on number 87. Right. So the focus was on Luther Burden, who is wearing number 87. And his quote when asked why he picked 87 was, I joke you not, all the good numbers were gone, which is just tremendous and kind of insight into his kind of dry sense of humor. This is a guy that we obviously know wanted to be a first-round pick and wasn't Still, Carmen, an explosive player through and through.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be interesting to see how he kind of integrates himself into an offense where at Missouri he had a lion's share of the targets. In Chicago, the ball is going to get spread around a lot more.
Yeah, and for as much as we know, like I said, he wanted to be a first round pick. He's really hungry. He wants to prove himself, all of those things. It's almost one of those things where you get to save a player from himself because he's not going to be expected to be the guy in the very beginning. And I think that that's good for young players. We expect more out of rookies and young players than we ever have before because there's more rookies delivering on those expectations than ever before. But it's still a culture shock. It's still a shock when it comes to the game speed, how the playbook is played, how it's delivered, how you learn it. There are so many things, so many moving parts, and every player will tell you, especially with the fact that they don't get a full offseason because they went straight from their season ending in college to training for the combine to training for the draft, for getting drafted, getting in with their team. They had no rest. They had no breaks. They don't know how much that really takes a toll on their body until they're able to kind of look back at it. I've talked to so many different players that are like, that first year in the league is an absolute whirlwind. So the fact that Luther Burden won't be expected to carry the load as far as the offensive targets go for this wide receiver group, I think it's awesome because it's really going to let him lay a really good foundation, learn from some really good players that are in that room with him, and get that rapport with Caleb Williams where the pressure is not on. And that can only be, I think, a good thing going forward and point to a longer career when you have this runway to kind of just get geared up for it. I think it's great. I know that he's probably not happy with that and he would want, all of the targets tomorrow. But just from a sense of a player development sense, I think it's a really, really great situation that they put Luther Burden in.
You'd never get a second chance to make a first impression. And the Zoom call with Luther Burden after he got drafted, he was visibly frustrated. No poker face, not happy with being the number 39 overall pick. And that's kind of what fans saw initially. And then you read all these draft analyst reports, and highlighted among them are that his practice habits are questionable. And as Carmen knows, as Mike knows, as I know, the Chicago Bears beat core pulls no punches. So in his second or third time in front of the beat crew, he was asked, what about those terrible practice habits, bro? And I thought that he handled that question well. And I think that he does have a certain amount to prove. I think sometimes these draft analysis profiles, they kind of become an echo chamber. And if one scout tells one guy that, then it just becomes the way that it is. But I do think that he has a lot to kind of prove moving forward. I mean, Mike, my question to you is kind of moving on to Colston Loveland, who wasn't able to practice, but is getting closer. He's saying that he can lift weights, he can run, he just can't lift as heavy weights as he normally does. But this dude he's a big dude. And you've seen a lot of Big Ten football. You used to work for the Big Ten Network. Having this guy and having Luther Burden in an offense with DJ Moore and Rome Odunze and Cole Kmet and DeAndre Swift, there's only one ball, right? So how do you see kind of Colston Loveland kind of fitting himself into this talented group of skill players?
Yeah, I think that's really the key. It really is a group of skill players, and we just haven't seen that with the Bears in recent years or ever, right? Like the Bears playmakers are generally 1 to 2 players. You see a guy like Colston Loveland being added to the team, and it's exciting. It's exciting that you might have a different dimension that this tight end could take you with Ben Johnson's offense. And we know what Ben Johnson likes to do with the tight ends. We've seen that in Detroit for a few years against the Bears defense. That's going to be exciting. Take it back to Luther Burden. I think that what you guys are talking about, a little bit of the chip on his shoulder, a little bit of this, I have to answer questions. I have to prove myself again. I love that sometimes. And sometimes it is a blessing to a team when a guy falls and maybe is drafted lower than he expected, because he comes in and he is pissed off and he's ready to go from the get-go. And it seems like Luther Burden might be in that camp. I mean, nobody questioned Luther Burden's skills coming out of Missouri. He was a 5-star recruit, a guy that all the scouts love in terms of skills. But there are these question marks that Obviously, you're going to follow any player if there's even a question. We know how the combine and the draft process breaks that apart with the guy that has question marks. But I'm excited that you do have a group of playmakers now for Caleb Williams. And it's really coming together that you don't have more than one option. So like Carmen said, Luther Burden might be in the best situation possible for him because he might not have to be relied upon. The other thing that they brought up this week, Scott, is that you might be seeing Luther Burden on punt or kick return. You like that? You like being able to get a guy that has that much athleticism, the ball whenever you can?
I do like it, but they have a guy named Devin Duvernay who's got a couple all-pro selections. But this is another one of those kind of embarrassment of riches and first world problems, right? They have Duvernay, they have Luther Burden, Olamide Zaccheaus can return. And I think that let's go back to the draft, the final press conference where Ben Johnson said that our goal is to ratchet up the level of competition. And I think that they've done that with these players that we're talking about because you don't perform. Okay, cool. Like we got options. Like we're not reliant on you. And I think kind of an interesting thing, Karma, about the next phase is that Declan Doyle, the offensive coordinator, was asked about, one ball, all these skill players, right? And he's like, we're still getting to know what all these people can do. Like you can watch the tape, but like they need to see it in person, which I think is going to heighten the level of kind of competition over the course of this camp. As they move forward, look, DJ Moore's football card is really good and he's going to get targets, but pretty much everybody else is kind of in prove it mode again.
Yeah, they are. And I think that's great. Again, with an offense that can be flexible and that can kind of tailor itself to what its skill players do well, what its line does well, what its quarterback does well. This is something that is an ever evolving process. If Ben Johnson's time in Detroit is any indication, again, I caution against using a 1-for-1 comparison with a lot of these guys when it comes to, all right, well, Ben Johnson did this with this person in Detroit. That means he's going to do this with this person in Chicago. I don't think it's going to work like that. But it is going to keep evolving. And that's what I think you can glean from Ben Johnson's time as a coordinator in Detroit, where this did not take its final form early on. You didn't know what this offense really looked like, what the calling cards of it, what its identity was right from the beginning, because it was all very basic. And then from there, it kind of built upon the strengths and the floor even of some of these players. I would like to point out, too, he still does really like using tight ends. And he has a background. Ben Johnson has a background as a tight ends coach. You looked at the kind of personnel share of what the Lions used last year. They used one running back, two tight ends, the 12 personnel at the third highest clip of any team in the league last year. So there is room on this field for both Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet to both be incredible factors in the offense and important factors in the offense because of the mismatches that tight ends create. You really, as a defense, don't know what tight ends are going to do when they're lined up in certain ways. Even if they're out wide, they can motion back into the formation, and then they can be it can be a run play because they're blocking, or they can start tight to the formation and then they go out wide in a route. That's the kind of things that it keeps the defense on their toes. It keeps the defense from being able to really proactively react in a lot of ways. So like they have to kind of sit back and assess the situation. And then all of those decisions then have to happen post snap when you have these tight ends on the field that you don't know what they're going to do. So that's the biggest thing I'm excited about. And why I was excited about the Colston Loveland pick in general was these guys create so many mismatches and so many question marks for defenses. And Ben Johnson knows exactly how to exploit that. So I'm really excited to see kind of how the offense takes shape once Colston gets back into the real routine and is 100% healthy. But I do think that there is room for so many of these weapons in Ben Johnson's offense, even if we don't see the full breadth of that right away.
Yeah, I think that's exciting too, Carmen, because the whole time when you're talking about the development of Ben Johnson's offense with the Lions, all I'm thinking about is that's coaching. And we haven't had that a ton in Chicago. You see guys that kind of plateau and their roles don't evolve. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that I'm excited about with Ben Johnson's offense is this new level of potential coaching where you could develop guys. And this is exactly what you're looking for with these rookies in their minicamp. And you also love seeing, videos of a guy like Eric Bieniemy getting out there, getting after guys, coaching them up, coaching them hard, right? That is what these rookie mini camps are especially for. It's kind of molding these guys. And I think it's a great point. I think that you're going to see a different level of kind of development than we've seen in different years under Bear's new coaching staff.
Yeah, and I think that there's an interesting dynamic to having Ozzy Trapalo, the offensive tackle, right/left tackle, in the mix here. He worked exclusively on the left side at rookie minicamp. I can tell you that I'm passing along that information, also saying that it essentially means nothing. Other than that, he also talked about the fact that coaches have told him that he's going to play on both sides and he needs to get right on both sides. And he's always said that he's going to be ready for either one. And the dynamics of, like, I don't want to piss Carmen off by talking about switching sides a bunch. Let's just talk about the offensive tackle situation in general, right? We've got Braxton Jones, who's coming back from injury. We have Darnell Wright, who is, I think, should be a mainstay on the right, could be moving to the left. We have Trapalo involved in this. I think this is my bold, not so bold prediction. He's going to be a factor in what happens moving forward. I also think Braxton Jones, hearing all this Darnell Wrightness going to the left side, he ain't going to take that line down, right? This is a 3-year starting NFL left tackle. That isn't half bad. But when you add Trapalo into the mix here and you've got the options and the Bears kind of being forthright about, we're going to try some things during the offseason program. How do you think this thing shakes out? Do you think it's unfair, unrealistic? We're not expecting Trapalo to start, but how is he going to factor into this whole thing? It's probably going to be a while before we get some resolution on who's playing left and right tackle.
Yeah, it will be. And I always joke, that it's really hard for offensive tackles to switch sides. Yeah. Offensive guards, it's a little bit easier for guards, but it's certainly hard for tackles because you're out on an island on that side and you have a dominant hand and you have a dominant every depending on what side you're on. And so if you switch, then your muscle memory is working against you. It's not that it can't be done. It's just that it's hard. And it's something that we treat very cavalierly when these guys come into the league as, wherever they play, we're like, well, you can play the other side, right? And it's like, you have to get used to the NFL level, the speed, the technique. The guys that are coming after you that you have to block, by the way, are very different from whoever you faced in college. I promise you that. And then to just say, you can switch sides and whatever. But I do think that something that Ozzy Trapalo brings to this offensive line is we've heard Ben Johnson talk about, all right, like you're going to need multiple players outside of that starting five to rely upon because they're going to play significant snaps, whether it's because of injury, whether it's because he decides to get creative with what he wants his offensive line to do and goes into some of those jumbo packages, which include extra linemen. There can't be a fall off or a drop off if a player gets injured. So I do think that that's kind of what the thinking was in bringing in Ozzy Trapalo. But at the same time, it's also going to give Braxton Jones a little bit of a nudge, being like, hey, there's another guy here who was drafted also like higher than you were. And there is this, so if you can make it as a 5th round pick to be our starting left tackle, there's not anything stopping Ozzy Trapalo from being the guy that comes in and takes it from you. I think that that's all a part of adding competition. Will that happen? I don't know. Are they going to move Darnell Wright over to left tackle? If they're going to do that, I really hope that they do it soon. And that's something that happens that gives him a chance to acclimate to that position. If they do decide that that's what's best for the team. But it is going to be very interesting to see who ends up starting where. And I don't think we're going to have that answer. Certainly not in rookie minicamp. Probably not in OTAs either. I think we got to wait for training camp to see how that all shakes out. Put your best 5 on the field. I get that. But also please take into account where they're comfortable and where their muscle memory is. That's all.
Yeah, I just think the depth is the most important thing there. I think, like you're saying, Carmen, you have to develop that depth. And you're talking about a guy that's a 2nd-round draft pick as an offensive lineman. That's nothing to sniff at, right? Like you're saying, Braxton Jones was a 5th-rounder. He's had a fairly successful career so far for him. It doesn't mean that he's not going to have this position when he comes back. But the fact is that you're investing resources in the offensive line. We've seen it in free agency. You see it in the draft. And you saw it later in the draft as well with Newman. So I think that it is important for them to develop him. The one thing that you always hear, or you've heard this weekend coming out of camp, is how smart he is and how intelligent he is and how well he could pick up a playbook. So that's going to give him a leg up that maybe somebody that can't, kind of compete in the mental aspect of the game like he can, but he's going to have to prove it on the field. And we know that none of it means anything right now in May. When the pads aren't on, it doesn't matter if you're a great offensive lineman. You have to be a great offensive lineman when guys are coming at you, and you have to protect your quarterback.
Yeah, and so I think that a lot of these second-round picks are kind of factoring into the depth. I mean, if he spends his first year as a swing tackle and Braxton Jones wins the job outright at left tackle, that's not a bad thing. And then you have the depth that was missing for the Bears last year when Braxton Jones goes out. Right, and the year before, and maybe the year before that, and we can keep on going. There are insane stats about offensive line combinations over the last 4 years. Just absolutely incredible. I mean, like we saw it when Braxton Jones went down against Washington, and poor Karan Amagaji had to come in and try to save the day and really struggled, or what happened against Minnesota, that there just wasn't any depth. And now you could – I did a way too early Bears 2 deep the other day, but really you could build a solid 3 deep at each of the offensive line positions and feel pretty comfortable with where you are. There's obviously a drop off, but this group is whole. And I think that's important. I think the defensive line is also getting whole if you look at it, and that's where kind of Shamar Turner from Texas A&M comes into this thing. He played off the edge for a couple years. He played on the inside in 2024, had a couple sacks, about 30 tackles, but playing on the interior, it's not about numbers, it's about impact. Dennis Allen was saying that despite the versatility, he doesn't want to overwhelm Shamar Turner early. He wants him to focus on that 3 technique and maybe even some nose, which I thought was interesting because he's floating around 300. The Bears say that they want him at 300 or just below it. To play the interior. That sounds like a speed guy. That sounds like a sub-package type of player that's going to fit in and add depth here. Because now you look at that defensive interior, right? And you're looking at Grady Jarrett and Dexter, and you're looking at Andrew Billings, you're looking at Chris Williams and Shamar Turner. That's 5 deep. That's can they even keep all those guys in addition to what they're going to bring off the edge? So state of the defensive line. How much of an impact should we expect from Shamar Turner? What's a realistic expectation for him? And the state of the Bears defensive line now that we've kind of seen what they've added. Still maybe a little lack of depth on the edge. I don't know what you guys think.
I really liked the Shamar Turner pick for so many ways. And a lot of it had to do with that position flexibility. I do think it's interesting to hear them talk about him going to the nose tackle spot when you do have Andrew Billings, not to mention Dennis Allen's defense doesn't really utilize a nose tackle very often. But again, you're talking sub packages, speed packages where you need like one big guy on the interior and you have the edge rushers. I do think that there is still some aspects of the rotation that are left to be desired when it comes to the outside. But the good news is when you have such a strong interior rotation, it helps the outside guys that you don't need a whole lot from them. It's just about keeping those guys fresh. And that's kind of my concern when you talk about, all right, you have Montez Sweat, you have Daya Odenigbo, and outside of that, I know they like Austin Booker and guys like that, but do they really have a strong outside rotation? But the good news is those interior guys should be able to get some push, and they should also be able to take care of a lot when it comes to in run defense and supporting the run and making sure that they are stopping the run. With all of that size on the interior. We know Dennis Allen likes size. So I really like just Shamar Turner, and it's interesting to hear kind of, they have a plan for him clearly if they know what weight he needs to be at. And that weight right around 300 really does tell me, though, there is a lot of flexibility as to what techniques he's going to line up on the defensive line. And I do expect there to be kind of some more exotic looks, some interesting looks, and some looks that just kind of change. And evolve as the season goes on, and what these guys do well, and who's hurt and who's not, and who's fresh, and all of that kind of stuff. So I loved the pick. I mean, it's not an accident or a coincidence that 3 defensive linemen out of Texas A&M were taken. I think the top 50 picks This was a really good unit in college last year, coached by a guy who they nicknamed him Coach Chaos, and he has some NFL experience. So it's a very pro kind of mentality there at A&M, and so I really think that's going to pay off in making the transition a lot easier for Shamar Turner. I really, really liked that.
I think Turner's going to be exciting, and like you're saying, Carmen, the way that Dennis Allen can use him, maybe it gives him a little bit of flexibility, and that versatility could kind of be something that Bears fans could kind of watch for as training camp and then the preseason develops. Scott, for you, obviously knowing Grady Jarrett and knowing how that they want to build this defensive line, Shamar Turner, that fit with Jarrett, with Billings, where do you kind of see that he can make his impact? Like defensive linemen don't always jump out to fans. And sometimes it's hard for fans once they're watching a game, unless a guy's getting a sack or unless he's getting a tackle for loss, they kind of get lost, right? How much are these guys going to really influence or make a difference compared to last year? Because we saw the Bears defense get run over a lot last year, especially in the line once Billings went down.
Yeah, if you can't stop the run, you can't do anything. It's just it's that simple. And Ben Johnson at his introductory press conference singled out Andrew Billings by name, and I think he did that even with knowing kind of in the back of his mind that Dennis Allen was probably going to be his defensive coordinator. So I think they're going to find ways for these guys to be stout up front. Carmen mentioned size along the defensive line. The Bears have tons of it. Let's not forget that Montez Sweat is also a mountain of a man too. So they can build a strong base defense that's really focused on holding up the point of attack and then letting those linebackers who are all fast come in and make those tackles. So I think that it's important. I think Daya Odengbo could be, you talk about his position versatility as well. I think he might be more of an edge guy. I also think when I heard Dennis Allen say he's going to start on the interior, he wants to learn the position. I think that's also code for, we don't want to overwhelm this guy. Let's focus him in on one thing, see how he does. And then when we get to August in the second preseason game, let's throw him off the edge and see what happens. So they can continue to kind of give themselves some of that versatility and depth off of the outside. If you're looking at a defensive line, you're generally looking at 9 guys, let's say. So you need maybe 4 on the inside, 4 on the outside, and a rover. Is Shamar Turner that rover? Maybe. Is Daya Odengbo that rover? Maybe. But they can do different things with it. And I think stopping the run is clearly imperative to how they're building this defensive front, because they know that if stopping the run can get you off schedule, and then that's when Sweat, that's when Odengbo, that's when Jarrett can kind of do their dirty work. Now, one thing that I was curious about, right? Like we're talking about a lot of these players, especially these high round draft picks that people know and they're interested in. This is also the first time that the media has ever seen Ben Johnson run a practice. Now, look, it was not operated at the tempo that a normal training camp practice is going to be run at, or even the mini camp practices, or maybe even the OTAs. He's going to be a little bit more demanding in those. But Ben Johnson did tell a funny anecdote. Kind of, we asked him, how was this practice? How was it running it? How is it different as a head coach versus coordinator? And he was like, yeah, I don't think I've ever blown the whistle at the end of a play before, so I didn't really do that once or twice. I need to get better there. He also is not like an old school Bill Parcells screamer, right? Dress you down in front of the team. He mentioned trying to find the moment, but players have also said he will get on you. He's going to be tough. And you could see that. But the thing that I found interesting is that he said it's about finding the right approach for the moment, right? At some point, the moment is going to be everybody huddle up and I'm going to drop some F-bombs. Sometimes it's putting your shoulder around a young player and picking them back up. Sometimes it's purely technical. You're doing this wrong, do this right. And I think that was a very interesting answer. And you hear so much about his competitiveness and his dog, and yet he's a cerebral guy. He's so many different things. I think if he can apply that to how he runs his practices, how he runs his meetings, I think that's a positive. But I was definitely curious to see, how is Ben Johnson going to run the ship? I thought he ran it well and kind of has that balance, right, between, smart guy, offensive nerd, and tough guy, too much testosterone football coach.
Yeah, the intensity there. Go for it.
I was going to say,
Norm.
Scott, you have kids, so you know that sometimes you have to take different approaches with your kids. Sometimes, like you said, you have to amp up the intensity a little bit to make sure that the kids know that you're serious. Sometimes it's all right. Sometimes you're the cool dad. Sometimes you're the fun dad. Sometimes you're all right. We'll get some ice cream. We'll hang out. Or sometimes you're going to get into them, like we saw Eric Beyond Me get into them as well, too. So, yeah, I think you got to take different approaches. I think that's smart. He's been around coaching. He's been doing it as an OC. He knows what's up. He had a great mentor with Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell knows how to massage a team as well in the locker room as well.
Dan Campbell has like one speed, guys, and it's phenomenal, and it works. It works for him. No, intensity can manifest itself in so many different ways, and that's the biggest thing that I've talked to players about Ben Johnson and how he coaches, and it's like, oh, he's intense, but that intensity doesn't look the same for everybody. It can be behind closed doors in a meeting room where his eyes are lighting up, and he's just like, if you could do this, then we could do this, and he would be like, all of that stuff. But then it also can show up on the field in MFing players, if you know that term. I've been around a lot of coaches. I've been MF'd myself for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But it's all kind of a part of getting the flow of your team and understanding who your team is and knowing your players also. And Ben Johnson's still doing that. My biggest thing and my biggest question, and I don't think it's something that's really going to show up until at least OTAs, but there's so much that goes on behind the scenes with what a head coach structures, how a head coach structures practice. And every coach gets there's a game or there's a practice script for every single day, every single period. You say, all right, this period we're working on this period we're working on this. These are how long the periods are. This is how many periods I want. This needs to follow this. This needs to follow this. This field is going to be used for this. This field's going to be used for that. There is so many logistics that go into practice scripts and what you work on. And it really depends on what the coaches prioritize. And so that's going to be what's interesting to me. Now, media doesn't usually get to watch every practice in its entirety, at least come season. But I am looking forward to kind of training camp and even mandatory mini camp, seeing the structure and the layout, because you can tell a lot of what a coach prioritizes based on how the practice is structured. And that's what I'm very interested in, because Ben Johnson hasn't had to do that. That's the head coach's job. That is always the head coach's job. Or how much does he give to Dennis Allen, for instance, to say, what do you want to work on for the defense? And do you see kind of Dennis Allen's influence there on the defensive side of the ball? But it's all up to the head coach to kind of determine that cadence. So that's going to be really interesting to me. And I know that that's got to be something that has, that's part of the learning curve when it comes to being a head coach, is now these are all the decisions that you have to make that you didn't have to make as a coordinator.
Yeah, I did think that all the B-roll that we just saw shot by our videographer extraordinaire, Scott Shagnon. One of the clips was Brian Poles, Ben Johnson, and Dennis Allen having like a pre-practice huddle up. I think the visual was important for this reason. Now, look, is Dennis Allen on the same level of the org chart as Ben Johnson, Ryan Poles? He is not. But the vibe that I got, both in watching Dennis Allen run the defensive side of practice and from his press conference and kind of how he's been talked about throughout the organization, you can see that they respect his experience. This is not a 22-year-old or 30-year-old defensive coordinator getting his first crack at calling plays. They understand, and I think that they value and respect him. And I think that look, Ben Johnson's making all the final calls on game day, right? If he doesn't like a play, he's going to tell Dennis to change it. But I think there's a certain level of autonomy and respect given to Dennis Allen. I think that's going to get the best out of Dennis Allen. And they've kind of said, look, what traits do you need on defense? Here they are. Run your ship. And that was pretty clear to me. And I think that's important. If you're going to bring in a guy like Dennis Allen, who's been a two-time head coach, long-time defensive coordinator, stats to back it up, you got to give him some autonomy to let him do what he does.
Yeah, I'm excited that they are doing that. And that's the benefit of bringing in a coach with experience. It's what we wanted. It's what we prioritized and talked about during the coaching search. And this is it now happening on the field. And you could see the difference that maybe there wasn't as much experience in the prior head coaching regime and the coaching staffs, right? There were guys that maybe Eberflus could have relied on, especially early on in his tenure, to kind of guide him through. And so I think that this match with Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen right now is a nice match of young, old, experience, inexperience, and you're seeing it blend together before our eyes. It's exciting, an exciting time at Halas Hall for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of as we move forward here, and we look at this group as a whole on defense. If you think about what Dennis Allen wants to do, right, which is going to be like a lot of press, man coverage. That's why he wants speed with his linebackers. Is this skill set? If you're looking at the roster on paper, naturally. If you're looking at the roster on paper, can this group execute the type of defense that you've seen from the Saints and from the Broncos back when Peyton was still there and he was defensive coordinator, especially on the back end, right? We talked a lot about this defensive line, and it's unfair to say, well, is fifth-round pick Zay Frazier going to contribute? Probably not in a kind of starting way. But when you look at the guys that you've seen, Edmonds, Edwards, the defensive backfield, et cetera, can they run this scheme? Are these guys fish out of water, or are they going to swim pretty well?
I'd like to say that they're going to swim pretty well because the base formation doesn't really change. But, I mean, defensive schemes are more fluid than ever. I keep saying that. But, I mean, in its very basic form, Dennis Allen's scheme is still a 4-3, although it's more a 4-2-5. The biggest thing, like you said, though, is going to be the difference on the back end and the way that the Bears were a huge cover 2 team under Matt Eberflus. That is not the case under Dennis Allen. He likes that press man style, which really relies on the corners then to be more lockdown corners. Now, a guy like Jalen Johnson, who has all of the accolades to kind of back it up, he's got the new contract, he's got all of that kind of stuff. He's excited about something like that because he knows that he can do it and he wants to do it. He wants that recognition. He wants that pressure on him. And make no mistake, it is a lot of pressure because if you are one-on-one with your guy, we're going to know if it didn't work out, and it's going to be your fault. And so that's one thing where it not only do you need guys that need that pressure, but you also need guys that can bounce back from that pressure.
Now joining us on the Chicago Football Show is NFL Network senior insider Ian Rapoport, here to talk a little Chicago Bears football. So first question is this, Ian. At number 10, the Bears walked the card up to the commissioner, and it said tight end Colston Loveland out of Michigan. Now, prevailing thought was the first tight end off the board was going to be Tyler Warren. So naturally, fans raised an eyebrow. What were people in the league thinking and talking about Colston Loveland, and kind of what was the reaction to the Bears taking him at number 10?
Yeah, really interesting pick, and I think really interesting reaction. So just to go back a little bit, there's something that happens during the pre-draft process. You get, everyone's mock drafts and all the kind of media people weigh in. And a lot of times you have media members, including some really, really good ones who are very good at this, like Daniel Jeremiah and others, who will kind of slot players how they think. And so what happens is we all who, do this ourselves, but also pay attention to those mock drafts, we kind of get in our head like, all right, well, like obviously Tyler Warren's the first tight end, Colston Loveland's probably the second. But you don't really find out until probably like a little before the draft how teams think of it. So in my head, Tyler Warren was a, potential top 10 pick, probably more 10 to 15. And then Colston Loveland was maybe a little after. And then an interesting thing happened probably in the 24 hours before the draft. Is I started to hear about some teams, Broncos, Texans were a couple of them, trying to move up. And I think everyone thought, like, all right, like, maybe they're trying to move up for Matthew Golden, or maybe they're trying to move up for Tetairoa McMillan. But as soon as the Bears took Colston Loveland, all those calls stopped. And so, like, I'll never find out who everyone was trying to move up for, but generally, when the calls stop, it means that's the guy. And, like, time will tell whether Loveland or Warren ends up as the better player, but he was really hot come draft day, probably more hot than I ever even realized until that day.
I think it is so interesting to see, the differences in how media talks about it, because the media pre-draft cycle starts, right, like way before even most of these coaches have a chance to look at tape on these guys. And then you get to closer and closer to the draft. And like you said, that's when it kind of starts to come into view of, oh, this is what the league really thinks about this position, or maybe this player in particular. But when you have new head coaches, like, Ben Johnson coming in with an existing GM in particular, how does that relationship kind of dictate how these teams operate then? And does it all kind of come together a little bit later because these guys are still getting to know each other?
Well, I don't think it comes together later. I think it just probably doesn't come together in the public eye at all. And what I mean by that
Yeah.
is, you have people like me who are pretty plugged in, know a lot of people calling around the league. And even though, like, I'll never ask a team, like, hey, who are you picking? You sort of have an idea. Like, if I did a mock draft, the night before, which I do, but I do like a private one, you have a pretty good idea, like what position they're targeting, what player a team likes. You sort of know. With the Bears, I didn't. And I think that was by design. So, like,
Mm.
as an organization, the Bears were unbelievably quiet leading up to the draft. I think using that kind of intrigue and curiosity to their advantage. Like, if teams knew they were targeting Colson Loveland at 10, somebody might have tried to trade up to 9 for him. Like, I don't think that was out of the realm of possibility. So they kept it really quiet, knowing that the mystery helped them. And I think what a really good GM tries to do is spend a lot of time with the new coaches, spend a lot of time with the new head coach, understand what principles and specifics they're looking for, and then uses their own personnel judgment and, like, who's the best player based on what they're looking for. And that's why I think the Loveland pick is so interesting, because it's really someone that Ben Johnson and his staff can exploit, but also someone who the scouts think is a really, really good player.
And during the course of free agency and the NFL draft, we've really seen Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles be in lockstep and really form a good chemistry and a good bond. But I'm curious if you can take us back to January when they hired Ben Johnson. There was at least some talk, even if it's sports radio chatter. I'm not talking via sources, but was Ryan Poles' job security in jeopardy? Or what would... if we can go back to that period, was it always kind of Ryan Poles was going to be there and he was going to hire the coach, or was there any thought that maybe they're going to make a change at general manager too?
Yeah, I mean, I never heard anything about Ryan Poles' job being in jeopardy or any. I never even heard that it would be a consideration that he would not be the GM. Like, to me, like, it was always going to be Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles, deciding on the future of the Bears. And they were, they were the two, and obviously there were others involved, but I mean, they were the two who were sort of leading the charge. And it was never like, at least to me, it was never like, well, we'll see what Kevin Warren decides to do on Ryan Poles. I mean, it was always the two of them running it, leading it, helping decide the Bears' future.
Ian, we see you on the Insiders on NFL Network. You can catch it at 6 p.m. Central on NFL Network weekdays. Love seeing you there, and we know a big topic of conversation is always Caleb Williams, especially going into this draft. A lot of conversation around, are the Bears going to be able to do enough to surround Caleb Williams, not only with playmakers, but offensive line talent? Do you think going into, rookie mini camps now, the Bears have done enough to kind of surround him with enough talent to help him take that step forward?
Yeah, and I think the work that, the Bears did offensive line-wise sort of in free agency, but a lot of times by trade, I think that really set them up for success. And, like, trading for a guard, like, isn't the most exciting thing. Like, definitely doesn't get the most retweets. But, like, that's how you set your quarterback up for success. And it was actually really interesting the way they did it, because the Bears must have looked around in free agency and been like, there are not enough good players at the right price that we can go find. We're going to have to trade for them. So, in free agency, I think Ryan Poles must have taken a look and been like, there are just not enough good players to go get. So they did it by trade. And it was really smart. It was really interesting. A couple players, one I knew was available, one I kind of thought maybe, Tooney might be available, but I wasn't really sure. And then it's like, it's not the most exciting thing, but really, really smart way to use money and resources and build. And I think Caleb Williams is really going to benefit.
Yeah. So now that we're kind of we're past the player acquisition part of it, what's the sense around the league for how the Bears are going to be able to compete in what could arguably be the toughest division in football with the NFC North. They only won 5 games last year, and they were quote unquote offseason champions last year. Is there more kind of optimism for how this team can fare heading into 2025?
Yeah, and I think, there's two things that are, kind of helping the Bears here. One is that quarterbacks should make a jump from year 1 to year 2, right? I mean, Caleb Williams wasn't perfect last year, but if you value taking care of the football, and if you value making smart decisions, he had a really good year. I mean, I know that there were plenty of things that were kind of a mess. I mean, obviously the coaching situation was not good, did not help, but he was kind of steady and he made smart decisions. So if that jumps a little bit, I think he should be much better. But I think there were a lot of positives. And then, Ben Johnson is a really smart play caller who is a tough, hard-edged dude who demands excellence. And if that kind of permeates the team, I think they should be in a really good place to succeed.
That's awesome. Great stuff from NFL Network senior insider Ian Rapoport. Again, you can see him on the NFL Insiders on NFL Network. Ian, thank you so much for the time.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
And another big thank you to NFL Network senior insider Ian Rapoport for joining us on the Chicago Football Show. Also, expect more guests in the future than we've ever had. Maybe not every single episode, but we're going after some big fish, both in terms of national media types, players, former players, analysts. We are going to bring you Bears insight from us and from them as often as we possibly can on the Chicago Football Show. Carmen, anything stand out from what you heard from Ian, whether it's about Colston Loveland or kind of what the state of the Bears moving forward?
Yeah, I think the most interesting part was, we went into the draft being like, I don't know who the Bears are going to take with their first pick, because they've afforded themselves so much flexibility with the things that they did in free agency, with the things they did via trade along the offensive line in particular. And it was just kind of interesting to hear that the rest of the league didn't know either. And especially if Colston Loveland was one of those guys that the league valued a lot more than maybe we were valuing in the media pre-draft. That's what saved the Bears, and that's what allowed the Bears to then get the guy that they wanted. Because, like Ian said, if they had communicated, or if they had been maybe a little bit looser-lipped when it came to what their priorities were and who they were going after, they could have gotten sniped, and they didn't. So I think that, again, that also showcases the fact that Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles are still on the same page, Kevin Moore, and this whole, with all of these voices that have voices in these decisions, like the Bears still manage to keep a secret, and that's not easy to do these days.
I love just hearing some of that behind the scenes talk and just some of that chatter, and you could just listen to that all day of the what ifs and what could have been, and this could have triggered this, and it's just interesting. And most of the time with drafts, you really don't find out those secrets; those really don't come out till years later. But that's what's so exciting about the draft. It's looking at it in its essence, you're just picking players, but there's so much that goes into it. I think that is why fans really do put so much energy following the draft, doing mock drafts, following our coverage. It's exciting. And now you see what the Bears have, and for better or for worse, you're going forward with it. You got some exciting pieces. You got to make the most of it.
Yeah, I would be curious to see Ian Rapoport's mock draft. I would definitely click on that page for sure. Too bad he kept it private. But I also thought it was interesting, just the adjectives, he's pretty plugged in, right? And a lot of these things that he's saying is not just, I'm an analyst, it's my opinion. It's kind of like what he's hearing. So the words that he used for Ben Johnson, I think it was hard-edged, which is accurate, right? But it's the way that he described this head coach and kind of the belief around the league that, I mean, I guess he was the top candidate of 2 consecutive coaching cycles. So he obviously has garnered some respect. But I do think that's going to give them a lift. And I think the coaching element of it is what's maybe could separate them between this offseason championship and maybe the others. The one other thing, and I know we're almost at the end of time here, Carm, but he said, that the natural expectation is for Caleb Williams to take a jump, and he's going to need to do that kind of moving forward. He's got the pieces. I think he's got the confidence. But you go back and you look at his college tape, and there's a lot of like running around and chucking it and using his athleticism. Can he kind of fit? Do you have confidence that he can kind of fit into the timing and the rhythm of what Ben Johnson wants from a quarterback and really take that next step? Because for all these additions that we talk about, right? If the quarterback doesn't play well, team's going to suck. I'm sorry. It's just the way of the world these days.
That's football.
It's football.
Do you think he can make that next jump?
I do. And honestly, I watched a lot of Caleb's tape from USC. I watched a lot of it live too. The things that made the highlight reel were the backyard football, the prayers that he threw up that came down, that, went for touchdowns, this, that, the other. And that is what separates him as far as skill sets go, is that he can create in the backfield. But that also doesn't mean that he can't be in rhythm or he can't do the boring stuff. I watched him do the boring stuff. And again, it wasn't good enough to make the highlight reels because no one wants to watch a 10-yard out, but like over and over again, or a slant, or just, like a dig, like this, that, the other over the middle of the field. But like those things are very important still. And those were the things that I was looking for when I was watching Caleb Williams tape. So he can do that. And especially if you have a guy that knows how to develop players and that's going to work with you and take into account what your skill set allows you to do, what are things you're comfortable with, what are things you're not comfortable with. What are the things you don't know? I mean, the push to go under center a little bit more, I think that's something that is going to have to go well, but I think it can. And I'm really interested to see, just the very beginning parts of this relationship with Ben Johnson and what it looks like, because on the field, and I keep saying this, and I want to warn people, like, I don't think it's going to look great right off the bat. I don't think it's going to look flashy or creative or like something like that we expected to see from Detroit last year. It's going to look probably pretty boring, but honestly, that would be the most encouraging thing for me. Because if it looked boring and you saw Caleb Williams get in rhythm and you saw Caleb Williams push the ball down the field in these 12, 13 play drives, that's what I want to see. And it's not going to be exciting, but I'm going to get excited.
Yeah. Football nerd Carmen Vitali. I do think that all your points are right, and I think oh man, I lost my train of thought now. I do think that there's a real possibility for him to fit in and play the role that he needs to play with this offense. I think this offense can be explosive. I think it's going to be fascinating to see what happens with it. And as always, we are going to be here with you each and every week to document, to talk about, to discuss here on the Chicago Football Show. If you've rated, reviewed, and subscribed to the Bears on the Marquee podcast, good, because you're still locked into the Chicago Football Show. But do I have news for you? We're on YouTube. Yeah, you heard that right. And I know that because more than 7,000 of you watched the show last week with Dave Wanstead. Keep those numbers going. Subscribe to the Watch Marquee channel on YouTube. That's when you can see us all break it down every single week. So excited. YouTube. For Carmen, for Mike, Scott. We're out of here. See ya.
Go Bears, baby.